That day I got up at 5:30 in the morning as usual. The cool San Diego fall air filled my lungs with freshness as I took my daily jog along the waterfront. It was during these morning moments that I felt truly alive, free of all the masks one has to wear on stage. My name is Lance Montgomery, and for the past 8 years I have been with the San Diego City Theater. When I returned home, I found Raven asleep in our bed, wrapped in her favorite beige blanket. Her dark hair spread across the pillow, creating an almost theatrical composition. My wife always looked like the heroine of a classic novel, even in her sleep. Perhaps it was this characteristic that drew me to her in my freshman year of theater school. "Good morning, sleepyhead," I whispered, leaving her favorite herbal tea with honey on the bedside table. It had become our little ritual after Raven started complaining about trouble sleeping 3 months ago. She slowly opened her eyes, and I noticed the shadows underneath them that had been appearing more frequently lately. "What time is it?" she muttered, stretching. 7:30. We have rehearsal at 10, remember? Marcus wants to run the third act of A Streetcar Named Desire. Raven wrinkled her nose as if from a headache. "I remember. It's just, I've been having nightmares again." I crouched on the edge of the bed, gently stroking her back. The last few months had been difficult. Raven had always been emotional. It made her a great actress, but recently something had changed. She'd become more withdrawn, often waking up in the middle of the night, and sometimes I'd catch her crying over old volumes of Dickens in our little home office. "Maybe you should talk to someone?" I suggested cautiously, holding out her tea. "Professionally, I mean." She took a small sip and looked up at me with her deep brown eyes. "Do you think I need a counselor?" "I think there's no shame in seeking help. Even the greatest actors need support sometimes." Our apartment was in an old San Diego neighborhood, a 15-minute walk from the theater. We bought it 3 years ago with all our savings and a loan. It was a typical actor's den. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, playbills on the walls, props from past productions turned into decorative elements. In the corner of the living room stood an old piano on which Raven sometimes played Chopin in preparation for roles. Over breakfast, we discussed the upcoming rehearsal. Marcus Tate, our artistic director, was known for his perfectionism. He could work for hours on a single scene, getting every line perfect. "Audrey says he's going to send a recording of the play to several Hollywood agencies," Raven said, spreading avocado on her toast. "Can you imagine? This could be our chance." I smiled, remembering our long conversations about a future in Hollywood. It had been a dream we'd shared since our college days. "First, we have to make this play perfect. You know Marcus. He won't send anything he doesn't think is good enough." We arrived at the theater an hour before rehearsal. I loved those morning moments when the building was still empty and you could hear it breathing. The old theater kept the stories of hundreds of performances, thousands of applause, millions of words spoken. In the dressing room, we were met by Kira Donovan, the lead actress of the company. She was practicing a monologue in front of a mirror surrounded by light bulbs. "Oh, Montgomery, just the person I need." She turned to us, her red hair swaying spectacularly. "Marcus wanted me to tell you that he wants to work on the scene between Stanley and Blanche first. So, Raven, you have some time to prepare." I noticed Raven tense up at those words. The role of Blanche Dubois did not come easily to her. Perhaps too much personal resonated with that character's tragedy. "I'll be in the library," she said quietly, clutching her shabby copy of the play. "I need to work through the second monologue again." When she left, Kira looked at me meaningfully. "How is she?" "I've been better," I answered honestly, pulling my suit out of the closet. "I think she needs professional help. You know, I have a good therapist I know." Kira began to put on her makeup without taking her eyes off the mirror. "Dr. Blackwood. He specializes in working with creative people. I can give you his contacts." At that moment, Audrey Palmer, our assistant director, peeked into the dressing room. Her short gray hair was gathered into its usual artistic mess, and she held an impressive stack of papers in her hands. "Lance, Marcus wants to see you. Something about Stanley's character interpretation." I nodded, casting one last glance at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me from there looked tired but determined. "Give Raven that doctor's contacts," I told Kira before leaving. "It might be just what she needs." Dr. Ezra Blackwood turned out to be a tall man with shrewd-looking gray eyes and perfectly styled silver hair. His office was located in an old Victorian mansion near downtown San Diego. I had insisted on accompanying Raven to her first appointment, and now sat in the spacious reception area, leafing through a shabby magazine while she was inside. Within a week of starting therapy, I noticed the first changes. Raven was sleeping more soundly, and her movements had regained their grace. She even started playing the piano again in the evenings, a habit that had disappeared months ago, and its return seemed like a good sign. Dr. Blackwood says my sleep problems are due to repressed emotions, she told me over dinner after her third session. You know, he has such a keen sense of the actor's nature. He says we often lose ourselves in the roles we play. I nodded silently, stirring the spaghetti on my plate. Something about the intonation with which she said the doctor's name made me vaguely uneasy, but I chalked it up to professional jealousy. After all, hadn't I suggested that she see a specialist? Things were looking up at the theater. Marcus was pleased with the progress of rehearsals of A Streetcar Named Desire. He was particularly impressed with Raven's performance. Her Blanche Dubois had gained a new depth, as if personal demons gave the image a special authenticity. It's like she's been reborn, Audrey remarked after one of the rehearsals, handing me a cup of coffee from the theater cafeteria. We were sitting in her small office, cluttered with scripts and costume sketches. But you know, Lance, sometimes I think it's not really her. What do you mean? I sipped my bitter coffee, wrinkling my nose at the taste of burnt sugar. Audrey tapped her pencil on the table thoughtfully. I can't explain it exactly. It's just, she's gotten kind of detached, especially in the scenes with you. There used to be chemistry between you two, but now, I knew what Audrey was talking about. Raven and I had always felt flawless on stage, but something had changed in the last few weeks. It was as if she had put an invisible wall between us, and it was reflected in our scenes together. Dr. Blackwood's sessions had become more frequent. Raven now visited him twice a week, sometimes staying late. We work through difficult moments, she explained. Ezra thinks I need more time. Ezra. When did she start calling him by his first name? I ran into a supermarket near the theater one evening and happened to meet Kira there. She looked excited and for some reason was embarrassed to see me. Lance, I thought you had a late rehearsal today? Marcus let us off early. Is something wrong? You seem tense. Kira paused, shifting the groceries in her basket. No, nothing. Just tired. You know, this Stella part is exhausting. I realized later that there was something she wasn't telling me, but at that moment I was too preoccupied with my own anxieties to notice the obvious. At home, I found Raven lingering again. On the kitchen table was a note written in her flying handwriting. Extra session. Don't wait with dinner. I stared at those words, and a strange numbness spread inside. How many notes like that had I found in the last month? I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window. Raven returned around 11, smelling like rain. She slipped into the bathroom and I heard the sound of water running. How was your session? I asked when she finally lay down next to me. Productive, she replied briefly. Ezra is helping me deal with childhood traumas. Turns out a lot of it comes from there. I turned to her in the dark. You never talked about the problems in your childhood. Because I didn't remember them myself. Ezra is helping me recover repressed memories. Ezra again. His name hung between us like a haze, and I felt something clench in my chest. The next day at the theater, I ran into Marcus in the hallway. He stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. Lance, are you okay? You weren't yourself at rehearsal today. I tried to smile. Just didn't get enough sleep. Nothing serious. Marcus shook his head. I've known you for 8 years. You never let personal problems affect your work. What's going on? I'm not sure myself, I admitted honestly. It just feels like something's wrong. With Raven, with me, with us. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. You know, in theater, it's like in life. Sometimes you have to trust your intuition. If you sense a falsity in a scene, it's definitely there. I finished for him. It was his favorite phrase in rehearsals. That evening, I sat in our home office trying to concentrate on the text of the new play. Raven was back at the doctor's office. Her psychology books, which she had started buying after she started therapy, stood in a neat stack on the table. On the cover of one of them, I noticed familiar handwriting, a dedication from Dr. Blackwood. Raven, your sensitivity is a gift. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Sincerely, Ezra. I reread those lines several times. Something in their intimacy, in the graceful slant of the letters, caused a deafening unease in me. Professional ethics suggests distance, doesn't it? Or am I just being paranoid? That evening, looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I noticed how drained my face had become. One last roll, I told myself. Just the stress of working on difficult material. But somewhere deep inside, a realization was maturing. This isn't a role. This is reality, and I'm losing ground under my feet in it. Morning jogging became my salvation. I doubled the distance, now circling the entire promenade all the way to the lighthouse and back. In these pre-dawn hours, when the city was still asleep, I could think clearly, without the fog of anxiety that enveloped me the rest of the day. That morning, my routine was broken by a phone call from Audrey. I stopped, breathing heavily, drops of sweat dripping down my temples. Lance? Sorry for the early call. Marcus wants to reschedule rehearsal for 8 in the morning. He's got an important meeting with investors this afternoon. I looked at my watch, 6:30. Okay, I'll make it in time. Will you warn Raven? A pause on the other end of the wire. Isn't she home? I tried calling, but her phone is disconnected. Something cold curled in my stomach. She has an early therapy session. At 6 in the morning? There was a tone of surprise in Audrey's voice. I remained silent, not knowing what to say back. Raven had left last night, saying she was going to stay at a friend's house. Supposedly, she and Kira were going to an early morning yoga class before her early session at the doctor's office. Returning home, I found Raven in the kitchen. She looked flawless, as if she hadn't slept at all. Immaculate makeup, hair styled in waves, a slight smile on her lips. Good morning? How was yoga? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She hesitated for a split second. Great, Kira showed some new asanas. That's weird, I just talked to Audrey, she said she couldn't reach you. Oh yeah, my phone ran out of battery. She turned away to the coffee maker. Do you want coffee? I stared at her back, draped in her silk blouse, and felt something dark and heavy grow inside. No thanks. Rehearsal's in an hour. Gotta get ready. The theater was in its usual morning bustle. Costume designers were rushing around making last-minute adjustments to costumes. Lighting technicians were setting up equipment, and somewhere backstage, someone was singing. I loved that atmosphere of anticipation. But tonight, it felt as fake as poorly applied makeup. Lance, Marcus called out to me. Come into my office. We need to discuss your monologue scene. His office, littered with theater awards and old playbills, smelled of coffee and tobacco. Marcus never smoked in the theater building, but the smell seemed to have become ingrained in his clothes over the years. Is there something wrong with the monologue? I asked, sinking into the shabby leather chair. Marcus looked at me carefully over his glasses. It's not about the monologue. I was talking to Kira yesterday. She's worried about you, and I am, frankly, too. It's like you've lost focus, Lance. There's a certain brokenness. I gripped the armrests of my chair. Is Kira worried about me? I wonder. Didn't she tell you about this morning? What morning? Never mind. I shook my head. You're right. I'm a little out of shape, but I'll manage. Marcus leaned back in his chair. You know what makes a great actor? Not the ability to play emotions, but the ability to control them. If you let personal problems cloud the mind. I get it, I interrupted him. It won't happen again. But it did happen again. Day after day, I watched Raven seem to distance herself from me, becoming more and more alien. She could sit for hours in our home office, ostensibly working on a role, but when I walked by, I could hear her muffled laughter. She was texting someone. One evening, returning from rehearsal earlier than usual, I found her at the piano. She wasn't playing, just sitting with her hands on the keys and looking out the window with a dreamy smile, like I hadn't seen in a long time. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, and she flinched in surprise. "Oh my God, Lance! You scared me!" She slammed the piano lid down a little too sharply. "I thought you had a late rehearsal today." Marcus let me off early. "How was the session?" "What session?" "Oh yeah, good. Ezra thinks I'm making progress." Ezra. Always Ezra. Never Dr. Blackwood. The next day, I ran into Kira in the dressing room. She looked guilty and avoided looking me in the eye. "Kira, can I talk to you for a minute?" She nervously fixed her hair. "Sorry, Lance. I'm in a hurry. Maybe later?" "How was yoga?" I asked forehead to forehead. She stiffened. "What? The morning before yesterday? Raven said you two were together at yoga." Kira went pale, her freckles even more prominent on her whitened skin. "Lance, It's okay," I interrupted. "I just wanted to make sure." That night, I sat in the theater cafeteria for a long time after rehearsal. Audrey kept me company, silently moving cup after cup of strong coffee. "You know," she finally said, "sometimes the worst part is not finding out the truth and continuing to pretend everything is okay." I looked at her. "Do you know something?" She shook her head. "I only know what I see. And I see you slowly deteriorating from the inside out." At home, I found Raven already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. Now I wasn't sure of anything anymore. On her bedside table was a new psychology book with a bookmark sticking out of it. Dr. Blackwood's business card. I carefully pulled it out, twirled it in my hands. On the back was a handwritten phone number, different from the one printed on the front. Something told me this number was not for an appointment. I barely slept that night, listening to my wife's breathing and trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. Maybe when I suggested she see a counselor. Or earlier, when I stopped noticing the first signs of her estrangement. Or maybe we had always been strangers, just playing the roles of loving spouses for so long that we believed in them ourselves. On my way out for a jog this morning, I saw an envelope in my mailbox with the logo of a Hollywood movie studio. In the past, a letter like that would have made my heart beat faster with excitement. Now I just put it in my pocket without even opening it. Somehow it seemed that Raven and I's dream of Hollywood didn't matter anymore, like everything else. A Streetcar Named Desire was scheduled to premiere the following Friday. The theater was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Costume designers were running with piles of fabrics, illuminators to perfect every ray, and Marcus became more and more demanding with each rehearsal. I hadn't slept much the last few days. I lay awake at night, listening to Raven stirring on her side of the bed, so close and so unattainably distant. Sometimes she'd get up quietly and go into the study, thinking I was asleep. The sound of her fingers fluttering across the phone keypad echoed in my head like hammer blows. "You look terrible," Audrey said, handing me a glass of espresso before morning rehearsal. "Why don't you take the day off?" I shook my head, looking at my reflection in the dressing room mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, an earthy complexion. The makeup artists would have to work hard to turn me into a convincing Stanley Kowalski. "We're 4 days away from the premiere. Marcus is going to kill me." "Marcus is worried about you." "We're all worried." I turned away from the mirror. "How's the letter from Hollywood coming? Did he send it?" "Yeah, yesterday, but you know," she faltered. "Raven asked me to send a separate video of her scenes, without you." Something shivered inside. Our shared dream. Not shared anymore? Things were going wrong on stage. I was forgetting lines, messing up mise en scene, and in the fight scene with Stella, I almost knocked over a prop table. "Stop!" Marcus's voice sounded like a whiplash. "Lance, what's going on? Where's the emotional truth? Where's the organics?" I stood in the middle of the stage, feeling cold sweat running down my back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Raven interject with Kira. "I'm sorry. Can we start again?" "No." Marcus stepped up to the stage. "Let's take a break. Lance, my office." Immediately, I followed him down a dark hallway, past old framed posters. Here's Raven and me in Romeo and Juliet 5 years ago, so young, so in love. Here's The Seagull 3 years ago, our first serious success. Pictures from a past life that now seemed alien. "Sit down." Marcus pointed to a chair. What's going on, Lance? And don't tell me about sleep deprivation or stress. I know you too well. I stared at his bookshelves littered with plays and theater monographs. Do you believe in acting intuition, Marcus? Of course. On stage, it's more important than any technique. And in life? He was silent for a long moment, peering at me over his glasses. Does it have to do with Raven? I don't know. Maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe I'm just making up things that aren't there. But every time I go on stage with her, I feel falseness. Like she's not only playing the part, but also us, our relationship. Marcus sighed heavily. You know what the hardest thing about our profession is? Not confusing reality and acting. Sometimes actors get so deep into a role that they lose themselves. What if it's not about the role? He didn't answer. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It was Audrey. Excuse me, but Anyway, Raven's asking to reschedule the evening rehearsal. She says she has an emergency therapy session. An emergency session? At 7 p.m.? Dr. Blackwood supposedly made some special time for her. Of course. I stood up. Of course he did. The rest of the day passed like a blur. I mechanically repeated the text, moved around the stage, but there was an emptiness inside. After rehearsal, I sat for a long time in the empty auditorium, looking at the stage illuminated by the ghostly duty light. The sound of footsteps made me turn around. It was Kira. I have something to tell you. She sat down next to me, nervously rubbing the edge of her scarf. I lied to you about yoga. I know. No, you don't understand. I saw them together, Raven and Dr. Blackwood, at the cafe on Ocean Avenue. The world seemed to tilt. When? A few times. They don't look like doctor and patient, Lance. I closed my eyes. Dozens of little things flashed before my inner gaze. Raven's new perfume, the late sessions, her dreamy smile at the piano, the separate video for Hollywood. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I wasn't sure. And then... She's my friend. Was a friend, Kira sobbed. I'm sorry. I got home late. Raven wasn't there yet, of course, since she had an emergency session. In her office, an open day planner lay on her desk. I'd never read her notes, but now something pushed me to pick it up. The handwriting was sloppy, hurried. Meeting with A at 7 p.m., make up a reason to cancel rehearsal. I flipped back through the pages, finding more and more entries. E showed a terrific restaurant. Call E about a separate audition. Don't forget to delete messages. The front door slammed. Raven was back. I could hear her humming something in the hallway as she took off her shoes. When she entered the office, I was still standing with her day planner in my hands. Lance? Her voice shook. What are you doing? How was the session? I asked without looking up. Good. We worked on... Don't. I finally looked at her. Please stop lying. She turned pale, but I saw no shame or remorse in her gaze. Just something akin to relief, as if the curtain had fallen after a long play. You don't understand, she began. No, you're the one who doesn't understand. I put the day planner down on the table. All these years, it's been a play too? At that moment, her phone vibrated. A name popped up on the screen. Ezra. I silently walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard her voice. Lance, wait, let's talk. But there was nothing left to say. All the words had lost their meaning, turning into lines from some alien, poorly written play. I didn't go home that night. I wandered the streets of San Diego until dawn, when my feet brought me to the theater. The old building looked ghostly in the pre-dawn twilight, its dark windows like empty eye sockets. The keys to the service entrance jingled quietly in my pocket. Inside smelled of dust, wood, and something subtly theatrical, a mixture of makeup, hairspray, and old velvet. I walked across the dark stage, switched on the duty lights on automatic, and sank into a front row seat. How many times had we rehearsed here with Raven? How many times had we stayed up late, honing every scene, every line? I realized now that all these past months I'd been in a play I didn't even know I was in. Audrey showed up at 7 in the morning. She wasn't surprised to see me. I thought I'd find you here. She placed a cardboard cup of coffee in front of me. I should have guessed sooner. I wrapped my arms around my head. All the signs were right in front of my nose. Audrey took a seat next to me. What are you going to do? I don't know. We're 3 days away from opening night. Marcus will kill me if I blow the play. Screw the play, Lance. It's about your life. I grinned bitterly. My life is the play, isn't it? And I seem to be the only one who didn't know the script. At that moment, the front door slammed. The normal theater day was beginning. I heard the voices of stage workers, the sounds of equipment being set up. The morning rehearsal was soon to begin. Go to your dressing room. Audrey tugged on my sleeve. Get yourself cleaned up. I'll tell Marcus you'll be in a little later. In the dressing room, I stood under the shower for a long time, trying to wash away the fatigue of a sleepless night. When I came out, I found a fresh shirt on the table and a note from Audrey. Got it from the dressing room. Hang in there. The first person I met in the hallway was Kira. She twitched when she saw me, but then resolutely blocked my path. Raven called me last night, she said. Asked to know where you were. And what did you say? Nothing. I don't want to be a part of these lies anymore. She was quiet. You know, I introduced them, didn't I? Recommended him as a specialist. I didn't think... Don't, I interrupted. It's not your fault. Raven didn't show up for rehearsal. Marcus was furious. 3 days until opening night! 3 days! He paced the stage. Where is she? Said she wasn't feeling well, Kira replied, avoiding my gaze. Not feeling well? And I feel fine when the lead actress disrupts a rehearsal. I mechanically repeated my scenes with Raven's understudy, but anxiety was building inside. Something told me this was just the beginning. After rehearsal, I returned home. The apartment greeted me with silence and the smell of her perfume. On the kitchen table was a note. We need to talk. I'll explain everything. In the study, I noticed her laptop was open. Never before had I allowed myself to read her private correspondence. But now something pushed me forward. The mailbox was open. Letters from E.B. I opened the first one. Dear Raven, our meeting yesterday left a deep mark on my soul. You are an amazing woman, capable of understanding such delicate matters. Your husband, for all his virtues, is hardly capable of appreciating the depth of your nature the way I do. Next. Honey, I've arranged an audition in Los Angeles. A friend of mine is a famous producer. He's interested in your talent. We just need to get the material right without too many complications. And another thing. Meet me at our place at 7 o'clock. Remember, it's our little secret. Yours, E. Dozens of letters, plans, secrets, meetings, a whole parallel life I didn't realize I had. The last letter, dated yesterday afternoon. Darling, everything is ready for your audition next month. I've booked a room at a hotel on the coast. Time to end this play and start our real life. Kisses, eh? I sat in a daze as I heard the sound of the door opening. Raven walked into the office and froze on the threshold. You read my mail. It didn't sound like a question. And you slept with my counselor. I looked up. Or rather, with ours. I mean, you recommended I see him last week, remember? Said it would help me with my stress. She leaned against the door jamb. It's not as easy as you think. Really? I think it's perfectly simple. It's the classic story. Disappointed wife finds comfort in the arms of an understanding therapist. Only it's usually in cheap romance novels, not real life. Ezra understands me. Her voice trembled. He sees me as more than just a supporting actress in a provincial theater. He sees my potential. And me? What do you think I've seen all these years? You've seen your reflection. She suddenly became rigid. The perfect wife for a hopeful actor. A scene partner. A comfortable backdrop for your talent. Her words hit harder than I expected. And that's why you decided to ruin everything? I decided to start living. She walked to the window. Ezra helped me realize I was worthy of more. Hollywood, a real career. Which you'll build on the ruins of our marriage. Which I will build on my own. She turned to me. Without you. At that moment, her phone vibrated. We both knew who was calling. Don't answer it. I stood up. At least be honest now. But she'd already pulled out her phone. I'm sorry, I have to take this. Ezra's waiting for me. I silently walked out of the office, out of the apartment. out of this version of life that turned out to be nothing more than a well-choreographed production. Behind me, I heard her voice. "Yes, honey, I'm on my way out." The day of the premiere was looming with the inexorability of a storm cloud. I now lived in a small hotel room near the theater, could not be in the apartment, where everything reminded of the betrayal. In the mornings, I no longer ran along the waterfront, but through the narrow streets of the old city, as if trying to get lost in their labyrinth. Marcus insisted that Raven and I continue to rehearse together. "You're professionals," he said. "Leave the personal off stage." Easy to say. Every scene now turned into torture. I saw a double bottom in every line, every gesture. "Stanley can't know about Blanche's betrayal until a certain point," Marcus said in rehearsal. "Play ignorance, Lance." I barely held back a bitter laugh. Ignorance, as if I hadn't been playing it for the past few months in real life. After another exhausting rehearsal, I ran into Dr. Blackwood in the theater cafeteria. He was sitting at a table with Raven, talking quietly. When she saw me, she turned pale. "Ah, Mr. Montgomery." Blackwood stood up, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Raven has told me so much about you." I ignored the outstretched hand. "I'm sure not as much as you've told me about me in your sessions." "Lance, please." Raven stepped between us. "Not here." "Where?" I felt something dark and evil rising inside. "In your cozy office, Doctor? Or perhaps in that hotel on the coast you booked?" Blackwood did not waver. "I understand your feelings." "No, you don't." I stepped closer. "You have no idea what it's like to discover that the person you trusted with your life, your soul, has been playing some twisted game all this time." "It's not a game," Raven interjected. "What Ezra and I have between us is real." "Real?" I laughed. "Like your tears in sessions? Like your nightmares? Or was that part of the plan too?" "You need to calm down." Blackwood put a hand on her shoulder. "Aggression isn't going to solve anything." "Get your hands off her," I muttered through gritted teeth. "Lance!" Audrey appeared as if out of nowhere. "Marcus wants to see you. Now!" I let her lead me away. In the hallway, she gripped my elbow tightly. "You can't make scenes in the theater." "Scenes?" I slumped against the wall. "Jesus, Audrey, my whole life has turned into one big scene. I don't even know which of it was real." Marcus's office smelled like coffee and cigarette smoke. He stood at the window, looking out at the street below. "Sit down," he said without turning around. "You know what the most important thing in the theater is? Talent, technique, emotional memory? The ability to hold a punch." He turned. "When things don't go according to plan, when a partner forgets a text, when the set falls down, a real actor keeps on playing." "I'm tired of acting, Marcus." He sat down across from me. "I got a letter from Hollywood. They're interested in you. Not the play, you personally." I stared at him in silence. "This is your chance, Lance. A clean slate. A new role." "And the theater? Premiere?" "We'll manage." He pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. "But first you have to close this chapter. Close it beautifully." That evening I sat in the empty auditorium, rereading the letter from Hollywood. The stage was lit only by a ghostly duty light, creating bizarre shadows. "I knew I'd find you here." Raven's voice sounded so sudden I flinched. "What do you want?" She sat down a few chairs away from me. "To talk. A real talk." "Now? After everything?" "Exactly now." She squeezed the armrests of her chair. "Because tomorrow is opening night. And the day after tomorrow, everything changes. You're leaving with him." It wasn't a question. "He's organized auditions. Big studio, serious project." "And you believe he did it out of love for the art?" She was quiet for a moment. "You know what the worst part is? I was really depressed. Really couldn't sleep. It was all real. And then he started talking to me not like a doctor to a patient. He saw me as a woman, an actress, a person, not just your wife or your scene partner. And that was worth destroying everything we had? What did we have, Lance?" She turned to me. "We were stuck in this provincial theater, playing the same roles. You were content, and I was suffocating. We dreamed of Hollywood together." "No," She shook her head. That was your dream. I was just playing the part of the devoted wife who supports her husband in everything. Her words hit harder than any slap. So all these years, not all of them. It was real at first. But then I started to realize I wasn't living my life. And Blackwood helped you realize that? He helped me realize myself. She stood up. I'm sorry it came out that way. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. She walked toward the stage, her silhouette clearly outlined in the dim light. You know what the ironic thing is? In Streetcar, my heroine lives an illusion too. Only unlike Blanche, I've decided to give them up. At the cost of someone else's heart? At the cost of my own honesty. She turned around. Tomorrow is the premiere. Let's play it well. For the sake of the theater. For Marcus's sake. For the sake of everything that was real. I watched her walk away down the aisle between the rows. Her footsteps echoed in the empty auditorium, merging with the beats of my heart. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew she was right. Tomorrow we have a major role to play in our lives. The role of people whose love is dead, but who must pretend it's still alive. Only now it won't be a play, it will be a farewell. The day of the premiere started out as a blur. I woke up in my temporary abode, a hotel room that, even after a week's stay, still smelled of other people's fates and cheap air freshener. On the bedside table was an untouched glass of whiskey from last night. I couldn't bring myself to drink it or pour it out. I arrived at the theater 3 hours before the play began. There was that special tension in the air, which happens only before the premiere, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and hope. The stagehands were checking the sets for the last time. The costumers were running around with irons and pins. The lighting technicians were setting up the spotlights. You're early. Audrey intercepted me at the entrance to the dressing room. Her usually bunched gray hair was disheveled, and she held a stack of programs in her hands. How are you feeling? Like a man who has a love story to play out with his unfaithful wife? I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. I'm fine. Lance, she grabbed my hand. I know you're a professional, but if you're not ready, I am ready, I interrupted her. It's just another role, right? In the dressing room, I sat in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at my reflection. The makeup artist hadn't come in yet, and I could allow myself this moment of weakness to look at the new wrinkles that had appeared over the past week, the shadows under my eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. There was a script on the table covered with notes, some in my hand, some in Raven's. We used to sit together often, discussing every scene, every line. Now these notes seem like messages from another life. 10 minutes to General Assembly! Audrey's voice boomed down the hall. I started to change into my Stanley costume. Every move had been practiced hundreds of times, but today everything felt foreign and wrong. The shirt stung in my shoulders. The pants seemed too long. Or was it me that had changed? There was a knock at the door. It was Kira. May I? She slipped inside, closing the door tightly behind her. There's something I have to tell you. If it's about Raven and the doctor again... No. I mean, yes, but... She nervously rubbed the edge of her dress. I saw them this morning. They were loading suitcases into his car. Suitcases? They're leaving right after the play. Tickets for an overnight flight to Los Angeles. I slowly lowered myself into a chair. So there you go. Thanks for telling me. My voice sounded like a stranger. I'm sorry. She took a step toward me. I know it's cruel. No, it's the right thing to do. At least now I know it's really the last play. The General Assembly passed like a blur. Marcus was saying something encouraging. The cast was hugging, wishing each other luck. Raven stood off to the side, flawless in her Blanche costume, but something in her posture betrayed tension. Remember, Marcus looked around at everyone, lingering on me. There will be representatives from the major studios in the audience tonight. This is a chance for all of us. I caught Raven's gaze. She nodded slightly, understanding, almost guiltily. She knew this was my chance too, a chance to start a new life. Without her. Backstage, I stood listening to the noise of the auditorium filling up. Through a slit in the curtain, I could see the audience seating themselves, Marcus greeting some important guests in the front row. I saw Dr. Blackwood among them, looking calm and confident, as if he'd come to a normal play, not to watch someone's life fall apart. 2 minutes to go, whispered Audrey, running past. The first act passed like a blur. I played on automatic, letting my body remember the movements and my voice say the lines. But something was wrong. The audience felt it. There was a tense silence in the hall, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. At intermission, Marcus caught me backstage. "What's going on stage?" He was furious. "Where's the passion? Where's the conflict? You and Raven are like two mannequins." "Sorry." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. "It'll be better in the second act." "Better? Lance, there are people sitting there who could change your life, who could change the life of the entire theater." "I know." I looked him in the eye. "And she knows too." He hesitated, realizing something in my gaze. "When?" "Tonight, after the play." Marcus sank heavily into a prop chair. "Jesus, Lance." "It's okay." I tugged on my suit. "I'm a professional, remember?" The second act began. Raven and I circled the stage in a death dance of Stanley and Blanche. Every line now sounded ambiguous. Every gesture had a second bottom. "You're not playing by the rules, Blanche," shouted my Stanley. "And what are they, your rules?" replied her Blanche, and in Raven's eyes I saw not acting but real pain. In the climactic scene, something snapped. Maybe it was my stamina. Maybe it was her mask of professionalism. When I should have grabbed her shoulders, my hands shook. When she had to push me away, there was real panic in her movements. "You never understood me," shouted Blanche Raven, and it was no longer a line from a play. "And you've never been honest," replied I, forgetting the text of the part. The auditorium froze. Even the prompter in his booth froze with his mouth open. We looked into each other's eyes and the whole world narrowed down to that moment. "Stop!" Marcus's voice cut through the silence. "Intermission!" The curtain dropped. Raven ran off the stage. I could hear her sobbing backstage. The cast froze in a daze, not knowing what to do. "Everybody out," commanded Marcus. "Audrey, call a half-hour recess." When everyone had dispersed, he walked over to me. I was still standing in the middle of the stage, unable to move. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I couldn't." "I know." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Go. Right now. But the play, screw the play. Go." I walked out the service entrance without changing, still in my Stanley suit. It was drizzling rain outside. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of a car pulling away. Maybe it was Dr. Blackwood's car, taking Raven away to her new life. Or maybe it was just an ordinary cab. A crowd of audience members had gathered outside the theater, brought out for an unscheduled break. They were talking excitedly about something, but their voices came through me like cotton candy. I walked through the streets of San Diego, not seeing the road. My cell phone vibrated in my pocket, probably Marcus or Audrey. I didn't bother answering it. The rain was getting heavier, washing the makeup off my face. Somewhere in the city, a plane was taking off, taking my wife to her new life. And I stood in the rain, still in my Stanley Kowalski costume, feeling real for the first time in a long time. After the failed premiere, I didn't show up at the theater for 3 days. I sat in my hotel room, turned off my phone, and stared out the window at the busy street below. People were hurrying about their business, laughing, arguing. Life went on, although my world had stopped. On the 4th day, Audrey came. Just knocked on the door and walked in without waiting for an answer, carrying a bag of Chinese food and a bottle of whiskey. "You look bad," she said, looking around the room. Crumpled sheets of the role's lyrics were lying everywhere. I was trying to figure out at what point Stanley's lines had become prophetic for my own life. "How's the theater?" I accepted the plastic container of noodles from her hands. "Marcus is furious. The play had to be finished with understudies." She poured whiskey into hotel glasses. "But you know what? The critics loved it." "What?" "They're writing that it was the most emotionally authentic performance in years. That the confrontation scene between Stanley and Blanche had a kind of, how did they put it? Almost documentary truth." I grinned bitterly. Documentary truth. A good definition for public humiliation. "Lance." She sat down next to me. There were representatives from the studios there. They want to meet with you. Why? To see an actor who couldn't keep a professional mask on? No. To see an actor who showed real emotion on stage. That's rare, you know. I sipped my whiskey, feeling the alcohol burn my throat. Why? What's wrong with her? Audrey was quiet. They flew out that same night. She left her resignation letter on Marcus's desk. And she faltered. What else? A letter for you. She pulled an envelope out of her bag. I recognized Raven's handwriting. Hurried, nervous, not at all like her usual neat style. I don't want to read it. You'll have to, sooner or later. The next morning I came to the theater after all. The empty auditorium greeted me with a resounding silence. On the stage, workers were dismantling the set of Streetcar. Our play had been pulled from the repertoire. Welcome back. Marcus appeared from backstage. Thought you weren't coming back. I had to say goodbye. He nodded. Come by my place. We need to talk. Everything in his office was the same: books, awards, the smell of coffee and tobacco. Only there was a new stack of review papers on the desk. They write that it was a moment of truth in the theater. Marcus motioned one of the articles toward me. That the audience witnessed the birth of a new sincerity on stage. They witnessed my personal drama, that's all. No, Lance. They witnessed an actor transformed into a living human being. That's worth a lot. I stayed silent, looking at the pictures on the walls. Here's Raven and I in our first performance. So young, so happy. Here's the company after the successful premiere of The Seagull. Here. I've gotten 3 offers from Hollywood. Marcus interrupted my thoughts. For you. For me? They want an actor capable of real emotion. Not technique, not the right intonation, the truth. And you think I'm capable of that after everything? After. Exactly after everything. He stood up, walked to the window. You know what makes a great actor? Not the ability to act, but the ability to be real. You went through hell and came out a different person. Use that. In the dressing room, I gathered my things. Every little thing held memories. The bottle of cologne Raven had given me for our anniversary, the photos of us together on the mirror, the play programs with her notes in the margins. Can I help you? Kira appeared in the doorway. She looked drained, guilty. I can manage. I put the photos in the box. How are you? Lousy. I lost my best friend and ruined someone else's marriage. You didn't ruin it. It was ruined long before you told me the truth. She sat down on the edge of the makeup table. You know what the worst part is? I saw how it started. Saw the first glances, the casual touches. I could have stopped it. But you didn't. No, because I thought she was finally happy. Ironic, isn't it? In the hallway, I bumped into a costumer who was carrying Stanley's suit to the dry cleaners. Leave it, I said. I won't need it anymore. But the next play, there won't be a next performance. At least not here. Waiting for me in Marcus's office were my termination papers and 3 scripts from Hollywood. I signed the papers without even reading them. Have you decided where you're going yet? Asked Marcus. Anywhere with no memories. He nodded understandingly. You know, there's an omen in the theater. How you leave is how your future career will turn out. And how do I leave? Honestly, it's a good sign. The last thing I did before I left was write Raven a letter. I read it after all, sitting on an empty stage. Her words, excuses, explanations, apologies, seemed so insignificant now. Dear Lance, she wrote, I'm sorry it ended this way. You deserve better. I hope you find your true role, in life, not on stage. I folded the letter and left it on the stage like a prop from an old play. Let it stay here, along with the other ghosts of the past. Audrey was waiting for me at the exit. Is there anything I can do? Yes, I hugged her. Take care of the theater. Thank you. For everything. Outside, the rain was drizzling down. I took one last look at the theater building. Majestic, old, holding so many stories. Somewhere out there, behind those walls, a part of my life remained. But there was something new ahead, unknown, frightening but real. In my pocket was a plane ticket to Los Angeles, not the flight Raven had taken, Another, my own way. I pulled out my phone, turning it on for the first time in days. Among the dozens of missed calls and messages was one from an unknown number. Mr. Montgomery, we were at the premiere, impressed by your sincerity, ready to discuss a starring role in a new project. Call back when you're ready. I looked at the number, but didn't call back. Not now. I needed to finish this role first, the role of a man who had lost everything and had to start over. A cab was waiting at the entrance. I got in the back seat, gave the airport address, and only then did I let myself cry, for the first time in days. Not as an actor playing emotion, but as a person who could finally be himself. My last morning in San Diego began with a familiar jog along the waterfront. I ran my usual route, saying goodbye to every familiar turn, every bench where Raven and I had once sat, discussing roles and dreaming of the future. The rising sun was coloring the ocean pink, seagulls were circling over the waves, and there was a poignant beauty to the farewell. 2 packed bags were waiting for me in my hotel room, everything I had decided to take with me to my new life. The rest of the things I gave to the charity fund at the theater. Let young actors wear my costumes, read my books with notes in the margins, use my props. Nothing goes to waste in the theater. Everything finds new life in other roles. Good morning. The receptionist smiled welcomingly as I went down to turn in my key. Leaving already? And me and the girls here are so used to you these days. I tried to smile back. Here in the little hotel near the theater, everyone knew my story. Theater gossip travels fast, especially such dramatic gossip. Thanks for everything. I placed the key on the counter. And for those cakes you sent over in the evenings. Oh, our Maria baked those. She's a big fan of yours. She's seen you in all the plays. An elderly maid, the same Maria, appeared in the hall. She smiled embarrassedly, and then suddenly walked determinedly toward me. Mr. Montgomery, her voice trembled with excitement. I just wanted to say, you were the best triggerin in the Seagull. And anyway, don't let them break you. I hugged her. Thank you, Maria, for everything. Outside, a cab was waiting for me. The driver, an older man with a gray mustache, helped me load my bags into the trunk. To the airport? He asked. Or somewhere else first? I hesitated. Can we make a little detour? I want to say goodbye to someone. Audrey lived in a small house not far from the theater. When I knocked, she opened right away, as if she'd been expecting me. I knew you'd come. She let me into the cozy living room lined with bookshelves. Coffee? No, I won't be long. Just wanted to... I know. She pulled something out of the drawer of an old secretary. Here, it's for you. It was a picture our troupe after the first play Raven and I did together. All so young, happy, full of hope. Keep it. I tried to return the picture. I have a copy and you need something to remind you where you started from. At that moment, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Marcus, probably wants to know if I'll see you before I leave. Don't tell him I stopped by. I can't say goodbye to the theater one more time. She nodded understandingly. You know what he said yesterday? That you were the only actor in his company who never played to the audience, even when everything was falling apart. Because I didn't act. I walked over to the window. The dome of the theater was visible from this point. All these years, I thought the main thing was technique, professionalism. And it turns out the most important thing is just being honest. Where to now? Really to Hollywood? At first, yes. And then we'll see. She suddenly hugged me tightly. Take care of yourself, you hear? And call me once in a while. You don't have to tell me, just so I know you're okay. On the way to the airport, I asked the driver to stop at the theater. I didn't get out, just sat in the car, looking at the familiar building. There was still a poster of Streetcar hanging on the billboard. Raven and I had been photographed during rehearsal, the moment we looked at each other. The photographer caught something in our gazes. Something real. Or was that an act, too? Beautiful building, the driver remarked. You come here often? I used to. I looked away. This was my life. The airport was noisy and crowded. I checked my luggage, went through security, bought a coffee at the little cafe at the gate. I sat and watched the planes taking off and thought about how strange life is. We plan one thing, but it turns out to be something else. The phone vibrated, a message from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Montgomery, the studio confirms your meeting on Thursday. Looking forward to it. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I opened the gallery on my phone, found the last picture of Raven and me together at rehearsal for Streetcar before it had even started. We were smiling at the camera, her hand resting on my shoulder. I hit delete. Attention! Flight boarding is beginning. I stood up, picking up my coffee. At the gate, I turned around one last time as if I could see the theater, Audrey, my whole past life from here. Your ticket, sir? The girl at the checkout smiled welcomingly. I held out my boarding pass to her. Los Angeles? It's a great city. Business or pleasure? Starting a new role, I replied. And for the first time in a long time, those words rang true. On the plane, I took a window seat. San Diego spread out below. So beautiful, so foreign now. Somewhere there remained my old life, the theater, the memories of a love that turned out to be a play. The airplane began to take off. I closed my eyes, feeling it lift off the ground, taking me to something new. In my pocket was Raven's letter unread, unopened. Maybe someday I would read it, but not today.